As the F1 world comes to terms with the loss of Eddie Jordan, here at Bring Back V10s, we wanted to celebrate the best of what Eddie and his plucky team achieved in F1 through 14 years with him at the helm. Eddie's impact on F1 goes way beyond that, but for the purposes of this special tribute episode, we're going to focus primarily on Jordan the team, which was ultimately moulded in the image of Jordan the man. And we hope that this look back at Jordan's greatest moments will bring a few smiles to faces as we remember fondly Jordan's best days in F1. So joining me, Glenn Freeman, to do just that are Ben Anderson and Matt Beer. Ben, let's start this one off with the traditional Bring Back V10s opening question. When you think of Eddie Jordan, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind for me is giving him a lift from a hotel in Malaysia to the circuit in, I think it was 2016. He would have been working for the BBC then, and I was working for Autosport with Lawrence Barretto. And we gave him this lift, and he was yabbering away, as John Noble would say, in the back of this car, trying to elicit as much information from us about Ferrari. He must have had an interview with Maurizio Arrivabene or something for the BBC. He was going on and on and on about Ferrari and where they were at and what was happening. This is quite a long journey, maybe 40 minutes from hotel to circuit. And there was a point at which we had to switch from one motorway to the next. And on this junction was what can only be described as a ramp. It was a bump, but it was, typical Malaysia roads, a bit shoddy. And this ramp had been quite fun in the preceding days, and I attacked it with the same vigour that I'd attacked it the previous days. But I had Eddie Jordan in the back, and as we took off, his buttocks left the seat and his head interacted with the roof, and he just went, "God!" And from that point on to the rest of the journey, he was silent. I did not hear one more word from Eddie Jordan.
So you found the answer to the question. How do you get Eddie Jordan to be quiet?
Correct. You just launch him over a ramp on a Malaysian freeway.
Massively spook him or concuss him on the roof of a car. Matt, I assume you haven't quite got a story like that, but what stands out for you about Eddie?
I can't come close to concussing Eddie Jordan by almost rolling a car. That's I'm out. No, it's a much more obvious one for me. Everyone talks about the kind of dance down the pit lane on the day Jordan finally won, but the bit that sticks in my head is like how often the camera caught him on the pit wall in like the preceding half hour, where it was clear that Jordan was going to win this unless they managed to mess it up somehow, and that kind of full body vibration that was going on. And for all, it's a theme I'll come back to a lot in this episode, I think, for all of the kind of, he was so funny, he had this different character and stuff, he was actually made a winning F1 team, and it was actually going to win, and it was real, and that I'm going to talk a lot in this about Jordan as a serious team, even though it was such a fun one as well, and that was it for me. That pit wall vibration. It's
a really good point, because it wasn't just that kind of nervous energy or a bit of agitation. It was you were witnessing a man in full on anguish, just begging that race to end. So I think back to that. I can almost see him like contorting on the pit wall. He looks in total agony. My memory is the jig, the dancing, the flailing arms, the flailing limbs. It was basically man loses control of body through joy of winning first Grand Prix. As you can imagine, we will come back to the 1998 Belgian Grand Prix a little bit later, but let's crack straight on with our top 10 Jordan F1 moments. The way we've done this is our traditional Bring Back V10s top 10 approach, which we do at the end of each series. I put together a short list. I think in the end it had 16 great Jordan moments on it. From that, each of us have compiled our own top 10s. Those rankings are then scored using the current F1 points system and then combined to give us an overall ranking. And we'll now work through from 10 to 1 of that combined ranking. And in 10th place, we have Phoenix 1991, which was Jordan getting a car onto the grid for its first race. And if that doesn't sound that impressive, you have to remember this was back in the pre-qualifying era. They were a brand new team. F1 had seen lots of brand new teams come and go in this era. Jordan turned up, went through pre-qualifying, got a car onto the grid, and it was Bertrand Gachot, and they got him 14th on the grid when proper qualifying took place as well. This got in purely thanks to Ben, who put it 7th on his list. Matt and I didn't include it. However, I will say, Ben, I'm happy this one made it in. It was one of those that I couldn't quite find room for. But I don't think it should be underestimated how big an achievement it was for a brand new team to not just make the 26 car race when that was a real challenge, but they're on the 7th row. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's the thing that swung it for me. It's the rarity of that achievement for an outfit that starts life as basically like a wheeler-dealer shoestring operation. And I was trying to think of comparative attempts, pre or subsequent to this, and it's so rare. I mean, you can take the Barrichello, I think, qualifying 11th for Stewart in their first Grand Prix in Australia, but that's with Ford backing and everything else. Toyota made a decent fist of qualifying for their first Grand Prix, but again, that's a manufacturer team. To have like a properly independent, effectively F3000 junior single-seater team join F1 and qualify that high up the grid for its first Grand Prix, I think it's a ridiculous overachievement, and that for me launched it into the top 10. Not something I remember personally, but I just think the gravity of that achievement shouldn't be underestimated.
The only reason this one kind of knocks down to a kind of provisional 12th-ish for me, it was a pretty competitive list, was how quickly Jordan made this look not that impressive by its own standards.
Okay.
Because wasn't this the only time they didn't get a car through pre-qualifying? Because De Cesare,
Yeah,
one
he
of them didn't make it. Yeah, Andrea De Cesare's
Cesare's
buzzed his engine, didn't he? And so he didn't go through. And I'm pretty sure for the rest of the season, despite being up against 33 cars most of the time, a few dropped out through the year, didn't they? Both Jordans made it to the grid. And the episode when, Glenn, you had Gary Anderson and Sam Smith going through this race, Gary talks about how basically pre-qualifying was some handy extra testing for them after a while because they knew it just wasn't going to be a problem. And I think maybe I should have made this entry like representing Jordan's whole first third of that season. But for me, Phoenix itself, yes, it was impressive. Oh, but so many more things about what Jordan did in those 6 months, like the turning up with the 7-Up deal and with Fujifilm, not actually big deals in money terms, but how Eddie pulled those off and how determined he was to come in with partners that showed his team was serious. There was so much about this team that was like, okay, a lot of new teams are coming into F1 right now. Most of them are jokes. I'm not going to be a joke. This is proper. So yeah, brilliant achievement to make it as high up the grid and to get onto the grid at all. But within a week or two, this was just normal business for Jordan. And so Phoenix doesn't stick in my memory as an impressive Jordan 91 moment with so much more to come.
Yeah, I think maybe I judged it more in isolation, because think how many crap new teams there have been in Formula One. Not just before Jordan came in, but afterwards. Not necessarily the sort of semi-works or works ones that I mentioned before, but other similar kind of shoestring, semi-unheard of, almost no hoper teams, and they performed as you'd expect, woefully. So I just think it stands almost as an aberration that they were able to do this. I know that subsequently they were much better than they might have appeared at that time, but in the moment, no one on that grid would be thinking, we've got to worry about the Jordans. And then suddenly it's like, bang, one of them's like mid-grid. I just think that's amazing.
Yeah, I totally see that. It's, as I say, it's one that I couldn't quite get in. When we do a top 10, I never work out the placings for the ones that don't get in. So that always gives you the handy out of going, this was my number 11. Because I haven't considered how many of the others would be my number 11 as well. But yeah, I'm totally on board. I can sort of see where Matt's coming from, in that he's basically gone, well, the rest of the year was too good, so this wasn't actually that impressive. But yeah, I was like you, Ben. I sort of look at it in isolation going, this team turned up and was immediately credible. You also had elements like it was a street circuit. Most of the other teams in pre-qualifying were on Pirelli tyres, which are always good on green tracks and on street tracks. So Jordan's biggest challenge often would be actually pre-qualifying would sometimes be harder than actual qualifying, because that's when you're up against the teams who have a tyre advantage. And I think you can quite often compare Jordan to Sauber, who came along a couple of years later and made a really good impression first time out and during that first season as well. But by the time Sauber turned up, there was no pre-qualifying. They were guaranteed really to get into every race, but they did a great job as well. Let's move on. In 9th place, we have another entry that only one of us picked, and that's Giancarlo Fisichella's starring role, but ultimate heartbreak in the 1997 German Grand Prix. This one gets in purely because Matt put it sixth in his list. I am glad you picked it though, Matt, because after I did my initial shortlist and sent it around to you guys, you asked for this one to be added. And I always get really annoyed when we do these top 10s. Edge Draw's normally here as well. He's a bit busy covering the Chinese Grand Prix at the moment. But there are times where one of you asks something to be added to the shortlist, and then when you send me your top 10, you haven't picked it. And I just think, why did you want it on the shortlist if you weren't going to pick it? So
just to troll you, Glenn.
Basically, yeah, and it works. It winds me up. But I was glad once you asked for this one to be included, not only did it make your list, it's actually quite high up. So a very significant moment, a Jordan moment for you.
Yeah. So this goes back to what I was saying about Jordan as a serious team that was ready to win. Because I was a massive, massive Jordan fan when I was growing up. They really captured my imagination. But I didn't want to just go, yay, look, they've got another fifth place. It was a lot of the build-up as they got better and better through 94, 95, 96. It wasn't a linear, great progress. There were stumbles, there were anonymous bits. But it was just, by 97, you're like, come on, you're so close. Can you make this a top 5, not a top 4? Can you knock someone out of that kind of quartet that dominate F1? And as 97 progressed, that car was clearly brilliant. And it had two exciting young drivers in Ralf Schumacher and Fizzy. And they squandered so many opportunities. And you get to Hockenheim, and Fizzy is fighting so hard for pole with Gerhard Berger, sticks it second on the grid. I can remember the ITV coverage made a massive deal out of it. I think at that point, ITV did like a separate 5 p.m. show on a Saturday. It was like a kind of follow-up and extra bits or a highlights or something. And that was mostly Eddie Jordan interview and a little kind of video package they'd put together about Jordan's rise. And I watched that back so many times that evening as a 17-year-old, just being like, yeah, this is it. This is when Jordan's going to win a race. Obviously, it didn't. It did come close. Fizzy was going to get beaten by Berger regardless of getting that puncture. Fizzy wasn't quite fast enough on the one-stop strategy he was on versus a very determined Berger on the 2 that day. But it was a real tangible moment out of all the 97 high points where it was like, no, Jordan's here now. This is not a one-off. Across a number of circuits, Jordan is being quick and it's in the mix in this very up and down year. So it really sticks in my mind as a kind of statement Jordan moment for being a really serious, credible threat to win races.
Yeah, I'm not too disappointed that one's made it in. It didn't make the cut for me, maybe just because it's a little bit too what if and this should have happened. Slightly overshadowed by Berger having one of his classic Hockenheim day of days as well.
There is a bit of a myth around this, isn't there? Some people believe, oh yeah, Fizzy was going to win that race about the puncture. As Matt says, that wasn't going to happen. This was going to be a second place, but it would have been an impressive one.
Yeah, exactly. But as we've discussed at length on the 97 Revisited series, such a madcap season with so many teams and drivers being weirdly good, really bad, weirdly bad at different moments too. So I think that just that whole mess of that year, and also Jordan being kind of generally credible throughout it, it sort of dulls that moment for me. It doesn't stand out as much because of everything that happened in that season, including with Jordan. But you're right, Matt, in what you're saying, that is a highlight, as we discussed at the time on our Revisited series. And yeah, I'm glad that's in, because that was kind of one of the races that made you, as an F1 97 computer game player, as I was, occasionally think, yeah, Jordan's actually a car I can pick to have a good crack at the championship in this game.
Yeah, and the thing was, okay, it was a topsy-turvy season and lots of teams had these moments, but unlike your mate, who had his moment 2 weeks later, this one looked repeatable.
You had to bring that up, didn't you? Can't you let the sleeping dog lie, please?
Damon Hill may come up again later in this episode. Let's move on then, because from here onwards, every moment was picked by all three of us, but there's very little similarity in the positions on our individual lists. So it's going to be really interesting to go through these. That doesn't always happen in these top 10s. There's normally a few that we agree on. In 8th place, it's Eddie Irvine's F1 debut at Suzuka in 1993, the race where he famously unlapped himself and upset Ayrton Senna in the process, to the point that Senna punched him after the race. We all voted for this one, but it still only really got in because of one of us, really, because Matt and Ben only had this 10th, but I put it 7th. It's the scrap with Senna that makes this, for me. It's become an iconic F1 moment that stands the test of time. Without that post-race kerfuffle, I think it's just, remember that time Eddie Irvine sort of weirdly unlapped himself, and we were looking at it kind of out of Damon Hill's rear wing camera from the Williams, and most people would probably go, no, not really. I don't remember that. It's the only reason we remember that time Eddie Irvine unlapped himself is because Senna went and tried to thump him afterwards. Ben, would this have made it into your list? It obviously just scraped in 10th. Would it have made it in without the post-race shenanigans?
Absolutely not. It's purely nominally in my top 10 because of that. You know, I wasn't quite following F1 at the time it happened, but it very quickly became something you learned about. It sort of put Jordan on the map again, you know, after they kind of disappeared.
They were having a terrible season up to that point.
Yeah, after the 91, you know, 91 looks like an aberration. I use that word to describe Phoenix, but the whole season does because of what happens subsequently. And then this thing happens in 1993 with like the best driver on the grid and him doing violence to one of the drivers. And like, it's that infamy that suddenly makes you think, oh yeah, Jordan still exists, or Jordan do exist if it's your first time coming across them. And so that is purely it for me. It's like it's just something that's like an unforgettable piece of F1 history that they're at the centre of. And if you take Senna charging down to the garage and doing what he did out of it, then it's like you said, it's just a weird kind of late race, almost nerdish anomaly that no one would remember.
Me, it's not the opposite as such, but I think it wouldn't have got in for me at all if Senna had just punched Irvine and nothing else had happened of relevance that day. If the incident
he punched him for no reason.
Well, no.
I don't like you.
Yeah. If like Irvine had been running 18th or something and been doing nothing all weekend, and he'd done a weird unlapping in odd circumstances and then got punched, don't care. But the fact was, like you say, this put Jordan back on the map. And if you looked at Jordan that day, you also went, wow, this team is actually back again as well. Awful 92 with the Yamaha engine, mostly rubbish 93 with a billion different number 2 drivers and a lot of mistakes and unreliability squandering what would have been a few points here and there. It wasn't as bad as it looked pace-wise. But then we get to Suzuka. Irvine turns up as a kind of last resort signing, and with his Suzuka knowledge from the Japanese Formula 3000, qualifies top 10, the first attempt. But it's Barrichello comes through ahead of him from nowhere in the wet dry race. I think the tyre choice was spot on, and Rubens did his wet weather thing, and he ends up 5th ahead of Irvine 6th. Double points finish with the unlapping bit as well. So yeah, you look at Jordan that day because there's been like a scuffle. And then you also notice that Jordan's actually just pulled off a really, really good result that really kind of changed its fortunes as the Constructors' Championship and set it back up again for, you know, the really promising 94 that followed. So that's what I mean by you can't take... It's the punch and the results and the performance. Everything Jordan did that weekend from Irvine's qualifying performance onwards was awesome in the context of Jordan's season. And then Senna kind of put a bow on it by lamping him.
Well, it's important that you mention the Irvine factor because it's not in the same league as the kind of Schumacher debut, but it's again like Jordan putting a driver into F1 who then goes on to have a tangible influence on what happens in F1 subsequently. You know, as much as I like to mock Eddie Irvine on Bring Back V10s, you know, he was a Ferrari driver for many seasons and won races, and Jordan start that process, and him making a name for himself immediately by doing what he did on track and then being punched by Senna is kind of wrapped up with Jordan. So the Irvine factor is another element that definitely made it more notable for me.
Yeah, I really like Matt's point actually about if Irvine had been tugging around at the back and through kind of freak circumstances had unlapped Senna, I agree with you. That would be less impressive. It's the fact that he was having a really good weekend and a good race, and he got stuck in where he really didn't belong at that point. We have a bit of a step up now as we go from the lower end stuff that scored quite lowly to what I'd consider a mid pack that are all quite tightly bunched, but they're a fair way back from our top 3, which are also close in their overall scores. So trailing just off the back of the midfield pack, I would say in 7th place is Rubens Barrichello's pole position for the 1994 Belgian Grand Prix. This was Jordan's first pole position, as you might expect, and one of only 2 it ever claimed. In typical Jordan fashion, it was the result of some opportunism in mixed conditions, with Barrichello nailing a slick tyre gamble at the end of Friday qualifying to go fastest, and then Saturday's session being too wet for anyone to beat his time, although it was quite a nervy wait at the end of that session, I think. Matt had this 5th. I had it 6th, and Ben had it 9th, which is really the reason that it lags just off the back of the midfield pack. But Matt, tell us, why did this make it into your top 5?
It's another one that fits into a bigger Jordan storyline for me. Like, in all the kind of horrible sadness of '94, Barrichello getting better and better and getting some of the results that he did was a lovely narrative, particularly with the kind of his closeness to Senna and having had his own crash at Imola that weekend. And the pole is just kind of the icing on the cake of it, really. And that the whole atmosphere around how much that meant to him, the team, and F1 in the circumstances of everything that happened that year makes it really special. The fact he lobbed it off the road in the race while falling back down the field diminishes it slightly, but not completely. He had some really good races that year. But it's also the way he got pole and that kind of Jordan spirit of going, don't care about what the big teams are doing. We think this is the opportunity. This is the time to put these tyres on and go for it. Often when you look at a gamble Jordan took, it was a really sensible one. It was the kind of the basic thing of, is it raining? Is the track wet? Let's put on the right tyres for that moment, rather than just overthinking something like the big teams might and just going, this might be our only chance. Let's not waste it queuing in the pit lane or going, yeah, it will definitely be better later, like a Ron Dennis might. Just nail it, get the pole. And so, yeah, it pulled it off in a really Jordan way, and it was a storyline that F1 really, really needed. And it was a little bit like the Senna punch. It drew attention to something Jordan was doing really well, a bit under the radar anyway.
It's a good point that it wasn't this wasn't just luck. It wasn't just you were on the track at the right time, someone else was on. This was a plan. This was a genuine gamble where we think, I think it's Gary Anderson, even Eddie Jordan credited Gary Anderson with it, saying, we think it's worth a gamble, give it a go. And then Rubens had to execute as well. The conditions were really marginable. Ben, only 9th for you, so you weren't as impressed as we were.
No, it was higher up my provisional list. There's just other things that happened at the end that dropped it. I mean, there's so many to choose from, right? We're spoilt, really, in terms of rich Jordan moments we can pick from. This gets in because of the fact it's a landmark. And I remember at the time being genuinely shocked to see Barrichello take a pole. But at the same time, that was even the 9-year-old me was tempering that with this is a really weird season. There's all this plank stuff going on. There's this stupid, neutering of Spa with the chicane and whatnot. And plus the element of, okay, a good plan and a well-executed gamble, but a gamble nonetheless. Like, it's a slightly circumstantial achievement. That's not to discredit it, but it's not kind of, we've out-qualified everyone on pole in the same circumstances. It's a slightly kind of weird session, so I think it deserves to be in there, but it doesn't rank so high for me compared to some of the things that Jordan did when they were more competitive and more influential on the story of the championship.
Just above Spa 94, we had a tie between our next two entries. I'm not sure that's ever happened before. We've done quite a few of these top 10s now, so I had to come up with a tiebreaker system. I considered being boring and just giving it to whichever entry had the highest individual ranking by one of us, a bit like saying, who had the best result if this was a championship, but that's far too straightforward for us. So instead, I asked the absent Ed Straw, who's, as I said earlier, is a little busy today with the small matter of covering the Chinese Grand Prix. So I asked Ed to split them for us. The two moments in question were Michael Schumacher's debut for Jordan in 1991 and Heinz-Harald Frenzen's first Jordan win in the 1999 French Grand Prix. Ed gave the deciding vote to France 99, saying while Spa 91 was significant, it was more a Schumacher moment, whereas France 99 was very much a Jordan moment, especially because they had a bloke in the field looking at the weather. If you don't know the story of Big Dave in a field, go back and listen to season 3, episode 4 of Bring Back V10s, where we covered that race in great detail with the help of Mike Gascoigne, who designed that year's car and was on the pit wall that day. More on that, though, in a moment, as Ed's deciding vote means we're actually going to talk about Schumacher's debut in F1 for Jordan first, as that has now ended up 6th on our list. There's a real spread of scores here. Matt had it up in 3rd, so if we'd done the tiebreaker thing based on individual placings, it would have beaten France 99. Ben puts it 6th. I had it 9th in the end, which I'll explain in a bit. Matt, you can go first. Explain why this made your top 3.
Okay, I kind of did it as 2 entries in one, because another thing on the shortlist which I've
you
seen
cheated.
hasn't made it was De Cesaris coming genuinely quite close to winning this race. So I kind of took this. Ed said this is more a Schumacher moment than the Jordan moment. I agree with that to a degree, but I think Schumacher kind of took Jordan's limelight. And in terms of impressive Jordan achievements, which is kind of what I based my ranking on, this one was so high up for me because Schumacher was great. Obviously, Schumacher was great to do what he did at Spa as a rookie. Incredible. He couldn't have done that in a car that wasn't working well at Spa. He would have been amazing, but that amazing might have been 15th or 16th. That Jordan, Gary's Jordan, was superb around that ultra challenging circuit with not the most powerful engine that was out there by a long way as well with its customer Ford. So the car was great. To qualify 7th, that was a massive triumph for Jordan. And then De Cesaris, okay, a lot of attrition in that race, a lot of strange circumstances. Towards the end, De Cesaris is second, closing on a slightly ailing Ayrton Senna's McLaren when his car fails as well. When we did a ranking, I think I did it solo of top 10 Jordan Spa moments. I put that one really high, maybe even first, on the grounds that it wasn't just a Schumacher thing. It was genuinely a near victory for this brand new team. We talk about how impressive Phoenix 91 was. Imagine if 5 months later, that team wins a race ahead of a McLaren that's, okay, got some mechanical problems, but is running. In the era of pre-qualifying, a pre-qualifying team winning the Belgian Grand Prix, it genuinely came within a car failure of being a pretty realistic prospect. And I'm like double caveating that, but it's still huge to even be a realistic prospect.
It sounds like you should have picked Cesaris then, because I did.
Yeah, maybe.
I was a bit naughty and I intentionally split them. We could have just done the Spa 91 weekend. It would have made it too easy. So
I put them both in.
Well, there you go. Yeah, Matt's got most Schumacher entry talking up to Cesaris.
Yeah. I didn't cheat. I put them both in. I see them as. I agree with your logic that the Schumacher thing doesn't overshadow that event in terms of a Jordan story. Yeah, exactly. And like De Cesaris is the other half of that. Even if he doesn't manage to overhaul an ailing Senna in the what if and finishes second, even a pre-qualifying team finishes second in that race, it's like, that would be a standout moment forever. So I see it as all wrapped up together. And the Schumacher thing is, I had De Cesaris in my top 10. Obviously, you guys didn't, but I see that as kind of like the sort of hidden story behind the Schumacher thing. That obviously, the lore of Schumacher takes over that whole story. But the very fact that, again, Jordan does what it later does with Irvine, except without the punching and maybe a slightly more impressive performance in many aspects. They take a punt. Okay, Schumacher might be seen as a massive punt, exactly, but they put him on the grid. They give him the opportunity to show the world what he's made of, and at the same time, put Jordan, continue this narrative, the amazing narrative of Jordan's first season, like putting them properly on the map as a serious, credible team to be reckoned with. So they're sort of two halves of the same coin for me, and you can't have one without the other. The Schumacher thing just gets in because it's Schumacher and everything that follows. It's just so famous, isn't it?
To explain my low ranking a bit more, when I started putting this list together, I thought I'd have Schumacher's debut really high on the list. I penciled it in early, quite high up. But then every time I came to something else and I'd kind of put them head to head, I'd always go, actually, I think that one's better than the Schumacher debut. And I just kept finding things that actually I felt were more significant, probably like Ed said, more significant to Jordan. Michael Schumacher's debut is a seismic moment for F1 and in F1 history. But I think I had to mark it down in terms of a Jordan moment because he only did about 4 corners in the race. And this doesn't affect the ranking, but it's also been forgotten over time that he was only actually 8th fastest in qualifying, and he got bumped up to 7th because Riccardo Patresi's reverse gear didn't work in his Williams. Ed's not here to do irrelevant facts, so I thought I would instead. As we've already established then, in 5th place, we have Heinz-Harald winning the 1999 French Grand Prix. I had this up in 4th. Ben had it 5th. Matt only placed it 7th. I have to admit, I thought if any of us were going to rank this one lowly, it would be Ben, because the French Grand Prix in 1999 was also, I think, the worst moment of Damon Hill's entire F1 career in the other Jordan. But Matt, I have to ask you, what have you got against the 1999 French Grand Prix?
Similar to the Phoenix 91 rule, I just couldn't get that excited about France 99 when I weighed it against what happened later in 99. brilliant strategic achievement to pull that off. Brilliant drive as well. Frentzen carrying an injury from the big crash in Canada too.
It wasn't a brilliant drive. No, I'm taking
Yes,
issue with
it
that.
was.
He was tugging around in that front. He spent all the race getting overtaken by Mika Häkkinen.
He was carrying twice as much fuel as everyone else.
Not for all of the race.
Yeah, true. Rubens Barrichello was the most impressive driving performance of that day, I would argue, before things went wrong for Stewart. But I love it, but it was still in the element of clever strategic fluke, whereas Jordan later that year was about to get genuinely really, really, really good.
Ben, I'm interested there. You were basically railing against Matt, who is the person who put this lower. My original question was going to be for you to tell us how you were able to overlook the Damon Hill factor and still rank this weekend
about that?
quite highly. But now I want to know. No, we don't. I want to know.
Oh, good.
This was fifth in your list. And yet here you are saying it wasn't a good drive. Mika Häkkinen was getting overtaken by Häkkinen the whole time. So if you're so against Frentzen's performance, why was it fifth?
Well, simply because of that. It's got the landmark element of being like their first win of that season. A opportunistic, crazy race, famous race. One of the most mental races you could have in what was a pretty mental season. But it's the Frentzen performance that kind of drops it down compared to other successful races Jordan had, like properly successful ones. Because I just think, has anyone won a race while driving that badly? I can't think of many. There were so many other deserving candidates that for various reasons, including man in a field, they didn't manage to get the job done. And I take the fact that he was field heavy and whatnot, but I just don't think he did that good a job. I think he was quite fortunate in terms of his own performance to come away with it. And I think he did a much better job when the stakes were higher later on in that season.
Okay. In fourth place then, just ahead of that tie for fifth, it was very close. It's another Jordan wet weather victory. It's the 2003 Brazilian Grand Prix, which was eventually won by Giancarlo Fisichella after Kimi Räikkönen was incorrectly declared the winner on the day. Ben had this up in third. I had it fifth, and contrarian Matt only put it eighth. But Ben, let's come to you first. Given all those things you just said about Frentzen and it being a lucky win, what got this one so high up that it was on your podium of Jordan moments?
This I think you could make an argument for putting number one. I'm surprised Matt has it so, because for me it's just like it encapsulates everything about Jordan. Like it's the quintessential Jordan F1 race, because you've got, at that point they're in their almost terminal decline, so the car's terrible or unfancied, driver lineup's not stellar, you've got a crazy race of crazy circumstances, you've got opportunism allied to a bit of strategic thinking, you've got Fisichella actually making a move on Räikkönen when he makes a mistake to take the lead. He doesn't inherit it exactly, like he's there to take advantage, and it's only the kind of monster shunting of Webber and Alonso that kind of curtails the race and creates the madness. But then you've got the madness of the result that isn't given. You've got the car catching fire in the pit lane as well after the race. It's just got a bit of everything, just a complete madcap race.
So it sums Jordan up in many ways.
Yeah, for me, it absolutely sums up Jordan's whole kind of F1 story in one race.
On my criteria of days Jordan was actually great, as opposed to Jordan being eventful and kind of Jordan stereotype. I get you. It's a criteria thing. I get your logic, Ben. As someone, I had an enormous hangover that day. It was the day after my mum's 50th birthday party, and I'd let our next door neighbour lead me astray a little bit with a lot of wine. I was completely destroyed. And I was just watching this race through a fog, even though it was late in the afternoon UK time. I was not in good shape still, and just gradually getting pulled out of my hangover by the events that were going on at Interlagos, how amazing it was. And I loved it, and I love it now as a race and a story and as a Jordan fan. But Jordan, like you say, was in its decline phase. Jordan was not a fun team to watch or root for by this point. There's a lot of maybes in it as well. I think the car catching fire at the end, great for a storyline, but didn't exactly make a lot of those pictures of Jordan winning that race of a car ablaze in Parc Fermé. It's not a good. It's a fun look, but it's not a good look.
Or being handed the trophy at the next
a week
race.
later. Yeah, it's just a bit too. The whole thing is a bit too scruffy. Yes, it was really well earned in that Fizzy was mega in that race as the conditions changed. Jordan pulled exactly the right strategy of getting the car filled up to kind of give it more options as things played out. Both brilliant call, brilliant driving in a car that was not quick. But also, like, had it run its full distance, would he have held on to that as like Raikkonen and McLaren sorted themselves out? Probably not.
I think so, because Raikkonen would have needed to pit, wouldn't he? Like his front tyres were gone. So I think it's that element of like Fisichella making the most of the tyre difference. Like Schumacher crashed, didn't he, in that race? Went off on the river. So I feel like there's an element, to me, compared to the Frentzen win in Manicourt, there's this element of Fisichella,
actually
credit to him, actually making it happen. Yeah, it's not all circumstantial, even though I accept the race is very circumstantial and mad. There is this element of like Fisichella in a rubbish car actually kind of seizing his opportunity.
This is another thing with this. I couldn't decide whether it made me rate it higher or lower. Is the fact other people did that strategy. It could have been a Jos Verstappen Minardi win because they were on exactly the same tactic, but Jos shunted it. And I yes, in a way that in a way that's more good for Fizzy and Jordan because they got it to the finish, and Jos didn't. I think Olivier Panis's Toyota was on the same thing and possibly broke down. Can't remember. But anyway, it wasn't only them on that strategy, but they made it happen. But also the fact that it could have been a race Minardi won pulls it down a bit for me.
Panish crashed. He broke the rear wing. Yeah.
Yes, that was it, wasn't it? Yeah. The fact it could have been Minardi win pulls it into the realm of anyone a bit random could have won this race, as opposed to the other Jordan wins I see as a race Jordan had to be in a front running position with a good car to actually pull that off.
Yeah, I went down the route of I love how crazy it is, but I couldn't place it. It was the lowest placed of the Jordan wins for me because I felt all the others were a bit more credible. I love this in isolation.
Oh, you're so boring, you two. Boo.
And I do think it's significant. It wasn't purely everyone else fell off and he was the last one running. The fact that he drove up to the back of Raikkonen and then Raikkonen makes that mistake. You have that moment coming down the hill where he passes him. That does legitimize it more than this being just a total freak. But yeah, I like the summary of it. It's kind of Jordan's entire F1 existence in a nutshell in one crazy rainy afternoon. Let's move on then, because as I mentioned earlier, there's quite a big gap between our top three and the rest, but the podium places were really tightly contested. This was one of the most varied top 10s we've ever done on Bring Back V10s, so perhaps we just need to always relegate Ed to the role of tiebreaker more often. It's definitely his fault. It's not just that, as Ben said, we were spoilt for choice with so many great options that you really could come up with so many different lists from Jordan's greatest moments. In third place, just missing out on second, it's Heinz-Harald Frentzen taking pole position for the 1999 European Grand Prix at the Nürburgring. Ben had this fourth on his list. I put it third, and this was Matt's number one. So, Matt, tell us, what made this the greatest moment in Jordan's F1 history for you?
Oh, you're saying that like
failure.
It's a controversial choice.
No, not at all.
No, it's that Saturday afternoon, first 20-something laps of Sunday combo, again by this criteria of when Jordan was at its most credible and impressive. And this was a proper, there was weather involved, but this was so legitimate. Like Frentzen had a really troubled practice. He was really short on mileage that weekend. And he gets to the end of qualifying in the mixed weather and he nails that pole lap so well ahead of McLaren. And it was a poor Ferrari weekend, but this was a McLaren Ferrari season, and Frentzen does that. And then in the race, with the showers coming and going in the first half, until he flicks the dodgy switch, which is takes the shine off it a little bit. He's holding on through all those circumstances on merit. He comes out of that pit stop still with the lead. Okay, there's another rain shower to come. Who knows what will have happened then? But for that period, from that final minute of qualifying through to when he switches the car off by mistake, because of the point situation, at that point, you believe that Frentzen and Jordan can at least take the title fight to the final two rounds. Whether they win it or not, massive question. They wouldn't have done with what happened next. But that is the time in Jordan's F1 history when it is a 100% legitimate championship contender. The Monza win, which I expect might crop up soon, that at that point he's closing in on the points. It's looking interesting, but this is the result. It's like that's going to just pull him right up equal. McLaren and Ferrari messing us up. Frentzen and Jordan are in this for real on merit with great strategy, quick car, great driver. And for me, that is my Jordan peak.
Yeah, I had this third, and really for the same reasons, that it was after that pole position where I suddenly went, this is real. This is actually going to happen. Like Jordan and Frentzen were presented with this opportunity of, can you step up? Now it really counts. Like the Monza win has kind of brought you to the dance. Get in there and get stuck in now. And they did. And I just thought, wow, this is actually it. This is actually going to happen. Obviously it doesn't. But in our list, on our short list, we were specifically looking at the pole position. We didn't do the whole Nürburgring weekend because I assumed that the outcome on race day would probably bump it down. But Ben, you weren't quite as swayed as us. Only fourth for you. Any particular reason?
It's purely the element that Matt mentioned of the shine being taken off it by what happens on the Sunday and it becoming one of those what if, coulda, woulda, shoulda races, rather than one where they actually got the job done. Like that's what takes it out for me. Like my sort of mental journey to considering them title contenders, legitimate force, comes earlier. Like Monza did it for me. I felt that this is just like an extension of that, and it's what you should be doing if you've got a sniff. I accept it was a great pole, and Frentzen drove a lot better than he did at Magny-Cours, even though he actually got the job done at that race. But it's still, a mistake he makes, and then the whole narrative disappears, and then it's another madcap race. It's not as genuine to me as what happened in Monza. So those few extra factors just relegate it for me. But it still stands out. Like at that point, all of us are watching the closing stages of that season and that race, thinking, wow, like Jordan could actually get themselves properly into the fight here. They could do it, and then of course it doesn't happen because of Frentzen and just like it not being meant to be. But you've also got the Irvine element in that race. You've got, I know you're saying it was based on the qualifying and not the race, but I couldn't separate the two things in my own head. There's so much else that goes on in that race that it kind of almost drowns that out for me. So a great achievement, but not Jordan's best.
When we had Frentzen on Bring Back V10s to talk about the 99 season in full, which is an amazing conversation. Definitely go back and listen to that. I think didn't he describe the race day as something like you're having the best party ever, and then somebody unplugs the music or the police turn up and shut it down or something like that. I can't remember exactly how he described it, but yeah, just that.
If you shut the music down yourself, maybe that kind of applies.
Yeah, you didn't pay the electricity bill, so you got shut down.
I thought this was the volume up switch, but it killed the house.
Yeah. Let's move on to second place then. And second in our list came up only 3 points short of taking the top prize. And it's a race we've just mentioned, the race that set up that dramatic Nürburgring weekend. Heinz-Harald Frentzen winning the 1999 Italian Grand Prix. We'll do reverse order of scores again now. We've kind of flipped. So Matt had this one fourth. Ben put it second. And this was my number one. For me, this had to be number one because it was Jordan's only dry weather victory. I know that meant a lot to people in the team at the time. And even though it was helped by Mick Häkkinen spinning out of a relatively comfortable lead, I think it was about 8 seconds ahead, Frentzen was the one there to pick up the pieces on merit. He had fallen back a bit, but he was keeping Häkkinen pretty honest on pace. But it's what this represented. Ben said it in our last entry, didn't you? That actually for you, the Monza win was the moment that you went, this is real. There is a bit of that. It's the fact that not only did they take a dry win, but they took it at a time where McLaren and Häkkinen left the door open to kind of say, right, there's a championship here for Eddie Irvine or Frentzen if they want it, because I'm going to keep spinning off any time we go to Italy in 1999. And Frentzen took it. It was one car fell off, but other than that, a totally commanding and just a normal performance. And in some ways that's boring, but that's what makes it so impressive. This was Jordan just legitimately running around at the front. And I'm so pleased they did win a race in the dry, because otherwise they've got all these great wins, but it's all pictures of cars winning races and people celebrating in gloomy, rainy conditions. And I don't think that would have done justice to how good Jordan were at this point. I think this is, and you can pick a specific point between Monza and halfway through the Nürburgring weekend. Anywhere in there is Jordan's peak for me. So that's why it was my number one. But Matt, not even on your podium.
This is all about the timing of the peak. Ben puts it here. I needed a bit more. It's because he's still. This is great, but he's still 10 points behind. If you're looking at it in terms of Jordan looking like a title contender as their pinnacle, not Jordan winning a race in the dry, which is a great pinnacle in itself. He's not quite there yet. I didn't believe it. I was like, 10 points is close, but he's still got Hakkinen and Irvine to overhaul. They're not going to keep doing stupid stuff. And then the first half of the Nürburgring race, it's like, oh, they are. They actually are. He's going to come away from this level on points with them because they're not even going to score. So that's why I put Nürburgring higher up as like a more legit, now Jordan can win this championship moment than Monza. But Monza was great. He did see off, for instance, saw off everyone apart from Hakkinen, who saw himself off. Just an impressive achievement. But it was part 0.5 of this particular story for me.
Yeah, to me, it is kind of the best sort of aggregate performance in Jordan's history. You've got the front row qualifying, you've got the dry conditions, you've got the move he pulls on Zanardi to get back ahead of the Williams. I think it was Zanardi. And then, he's, like, as you say, Glenn, he's in the mix. Is Hakkinen's race. That's the one element that kind of drops it down slightly, is that, he's not out and out ahead. It takes Hakkinen throwing it off the road to give him the window of opportunity. But nevertheless, it's a great performance in legitimate, proper conditions, not really aided by kind of too much randomness. And for me, it was like, okay, now they are a serious, credible title contender. Yeah, my personal journey was slightly ahead of the Nürburgring. But again, like you say, this is one you could legitimately put number one. I'd say there's kind of 3 or 4 moments we've discussed that could be number one, and I'm not surprised actually that it's such a close race, because we're just spoilt for choice.
If cars falling off to present an opportunity for Jordan to win a race gets it marked down, I may be about to take issue with your number one pick, Ben.
Surely not.
So let's move on to number one. By this point, you've probably guessed it, but it was very close in our overall scores, which I think is a sign, as Ben said, there were so many great moments. There are so many different ways to put these lists together, but a narrow victory is going to the 1998 Belgian Grand Prix, where Jordan claimed its first win with Damon Hill and Ralf Schumacher completed a 1-2, which led to Eddie Jordan dancing like a maniac on his way to the podium. We all had this on our individual podiums. How could you not? But only one of us put it first. And for regular listeners, I wonder. Regular listeners or viewers, now we're on YouTube. Hello to everyone who's watching this on YouTube on the Bring Back V10s channel. It will come as no surprise that it was Damon Hill's superfan Ben who put this number one. Meanwhile, I had it second and Matt had it third. Ben, you said there that there were 3 or 4 that could have been number one, but deep down, a Damon Hill victory, was this ever in doubt, or is there more to it than that time Damon Hill won a race for Jordan?
I mean, that's a big part of it. Obviously, I know I'm kind of repping my Jordan 191 spec hoodie, but I should be wearing yellow, really. Bitten and Hiss's yellow for this moment.
This was the closest I could get, black and yellow.
Oh, nice. Yeah, you got some black and yellow. It's that. Plus, it's a madcap race. Plus, it's a 1-2 result. Plus, it's the first win for the team. There's the element of like Damon redemption for me personally, but that's less important, obviously, to everyone else, particularly you two. But then also, it's the foundation of both of you mentioned your at the top of the show, the moments that you first think of when you think of Eddie Jordan, and it comes from that race. So I think it's seminal, isn't it? It's absolutely like Jordan putting themselves on the map properly after so many kind of almost moments, near misses, kind of flirting with it beforehand. Plus it's got Damon's final Grand Prix victory is the icing or the cherry on top of the icing on top of the cake for me.
And his terrible podium leap where he looked like he was trying to do a Schumacher, but I think Damon's even admitted he was a bit cold and wet by then, so he didn't do a very good job. Matt, this was behind the Frentzen Nürburgring pole and Schumacher's debut for you. Was Spa 98 almost a bit too obvious to be your number one?
No, it wasn't. Sometimes that is my reason for doing top 10 choices in the order I do, just to be a bit arsey. But in this case, so normally I mark on vibes, not like sensible performance and stats, but I kind of flipped it for this because for me, my love for Jordan comes from taking it seriously when everyone else thought it was all vibes, and just going, no, there's a serious team that's going to do something here. Ignore like the jokes. It's really impressive what it's done with the resources it has. And yes, Spa 98. What a story! What an achievement! Yeah, there was people smashing their cars up ahead, but Jordan didn't. Jordan's drivers were well managed in that circumstance, much to Ralph's annoyance. But Jordan did what it had to do to win that race and to get a 1-2. What a way to do it! Fantastic. However, Jordan wasn't very good in 98 by Jordan's standards. I know it got there in the end. I know it eventually scrapes back to fourth in the championship, but it's not, for me, 98 is not as impressive for Jordan's season as 99, obviously, or even like 97 in terms of performance and potential.
I think over the course of the year, they're better in 97, but by they had the car sorted out by this point. The 98 car was looking decent.
Yeah, but not like this might win a race on merit decent, which the 97 car did. Okay, in a much more open and interesting season with much nicer cars. But it's still, for me, is kind of not even marked down a tiny bit relatively by the fact this wasn't a peak Jordan performance time. It still had that slight element of fluke in it.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say, what happened in Spa 98, it doesn't supersede 99 in terms of like Jordan's pure performance or their ranking in the pecking order or their credibility as a proper contender at the front of F1, but it's the peak result, and that for me just lifts it. Most of Jordan's best moments are Madcat, and even Monza 99 has the Madcat element, and Hakkinen crying in the bushes and doing his best to throw it all away. No Michael Schumacher in the picture by that point too, so you can make a circumstantial argument against almost anything that Jordan achieved in terms of its peak results. So the fact that they got both cars home and never got close to achieving that same level of peak result, plus Damon, obviously, that lifts it for me.
Well, I was going to say,
nice one, Damon.
When the car was really good in 1999, whose fault was it that they never got close to taking a 1-2?
Well, yeah, exactly. He just like every driver, eventually you tip off the peak, don't you? I don't think even I can argue that Damon was at his best, probably even in 98, but certainly by 99 he was his goose was well cooked.
Yeah, even eventually get to the point where you tip off the peak and then you end the season by parking a healthy car. This is
Manuel was his worst part, and I was thinking when you said that, I was like, he did park that completely healthy car, just thrown in the gravel at Suzuka as well.
At least he didn't try to just continue his F1 career belligerently like Jacques Villeneuve did. So
it's unnecessary.
Certain element of class.
Strays. I was about to say we're being very unfair on Damon here, because this is meant to be a celebration of Jordan, and we're only really being mean to Damon because we know it gets under Ben's skin. And then Ben has taken a shot of his own. I do think, as we're discussing Spa 98, which we have done a full episode on, we had then ITV pit lane reporter Louise Goodman joined us for that, and that's really interesting because she used to work for Jordan before she got her TV gig, so she was very close to Eddie and the team and knew the new team inside out, really. So that's a great listen to go back to now while we're all thinking about great Jordan moments. But I feel that we should have a quick moment. You talked about them getting two cars home, first and second. There was obviously, to make this a bit more Jordan, to add some more chaos, we had obviously the team orders stuff with Ralph being told to hold station and all the doubt around if he actually would. Even that has been made more iconic because there was a documentary crew following Jordan that season. They had access to the radio, so on YouTube now you can hear the radio transmissions of Sam Michael, who was Ralph's engineer at the time, trying to get Ralph to obey the order. And it's a long time before Ralph responds. And I think in the end, he does something like he just says, "Okay, Sam," and that's it. I've spoke to Ralph about this when he was in the DTM, when I was covering it. And he said the lack of response was not him mulling over if he was going to obey the order. The first time they said it, he heard it, he knew he had to hold station. He was making a point by not responding, and just he wanted to spook the pit wall and the garage out to show his displeasure. And he said eventually they asked me so many times that I thought I would say okay, just so they would shut up really and stop asking him. But
sounds similar to what Lando Norris did in Hungary last year when he was desperately being told by McLaren that he's got to swap places with Piastri, and he's like, do I have to? Oh, I suppose I should put them out of their misery eventually.
Yeah, very true. I would say the Jordan communications are more direct than Lando got that day, but we're going massively off piste here. I think does that element add anything to this? Ben, obviously we didn't have TV, we didn't have radio broadcasts on TV back then. If you've been watching that as a Damon Hill fan and you were hearing the radio at the time and you were hearing that Ralph isn't responding, would you have been even more nervous than I imagine you were watching it at the time?
Yeah, it would have been. Yeah, absolutely. There's always in Formula One this element of protecting the result, using team orders when you have to, one driver subjugating to another in certain circumstances, whether it's, title on the line or late season opportunity, or in this case, like, wow, we're just going to get the best result we'll ever get. Like, let's not mess it up. But if you think, you expect, when the teammates are not at war, which Damon and Ralph weren't, you'd expect that, that's just going to be acquiesced with. So had I been watching knowing that Ralph's kind of not really making that clear, I wouldn't say I'm going to go into full Eddie Jordan nervous vibration mode, but probably like the Christian Horner twitchy leg starts to happen, certainly.
I think I'd have just been furious. Like,
on whose behalf?
Just against Ralph for even instilling that doubt. Because, young driver, chance to win your first F1 race, fine. But look at the sky, look at the track, look at all the wrecked cars. Think about your team that is about to achieve this unprecedented thing. Just have a little bit of big picture understanding beyond yourself. Difficult F1 driver in a pouring wet race. Your whole life is built around you becoming world champion. I get that. I do get that a little bit.
He didn't like Jordan either, did he?
No, he didn't. But he was on his way out of the team by that time as well. I do get all that from a human perspective. But as an angry 18-year-old at that point, I'd have been going, Ralph, shut up. No, don't shut up. Unshut up. Say something. Say yes. Behave.
I think also you could tell really Eddie didn't want to do that. And obviously it's famous that this all came about behind the safety car. Damon got on the radio. We've heard those radio transmissions as well. He's saying, I'm going to tell you something now, and I want Eddie to hear this. So it was aimed purely at Eddie Jordan because Damon could see the situation and he would have known. He would have known this, as you guys just said, this means the world to Jordan. They're about to scale the mountain and win a Grand Prix. And Damon would have known this is my opportunity to get this result locked in. And he knew
great tactics.
And he knew that by going, right, I want Eddie to hear this. And he'd gone, that would have gone straight into Eddie's brain and just created even more chaos. And they did the right thing in that situation. You're trying to win a race for the first time. You're 1-2. There's hardly any cars left in the race. The conditions are appalling. You've got to do that. So I think Jordan and Eddie made the right decision. So let's leave it there then. This has been so much fun. We hope it's been enjoyable for those of you listening as well to kind of look back on many of the reasons that so many of us loved Jordan, the race team. So let's go through then. We'll take you through our top 10 Jordan moments in F1. Number 10, getting a car onto the grid for its debut in 1991 in the days of pre-qualifying. Number 9, Giancarlo Fisichello's 1997 German Grand Prix heroics. Number 8, Eddie Irvine's F1 debut at Suzuka in 93. Number 7, Rubens Barrichello taking Jordan's first pole at Spa in 94. Number 6, Michael Schumacher's F1 debut at Spa in 1991. Number 5, Heinz-Harald Frentzen winning the 99 French Grand Prix. Number 4, Giancarlo Fisichella winning the 2003 Brazilian Grand Prix. Number 3, Frentzen's pole position at the Nürburgring in 99. Number 2, Frentzen's win at Monza in 99. And number 1, Jordan's first win at Spa in 1998, sealed in style with a 1-2 finish for Damon Hill and Ralph Schumacher. Thanks to Matt and Ben for finding the time to squeeze this bonus show in. And thank you to everyone listening and watching, especially those of you who got in touch after the sad news broke about Eddie, and you were asking if there was a way that Bring Back V10s would be paying tribute. Well, I also did a free bonus show over on the Races Patreon where I spent over an hour going through memories and tributes that were sent in by our members. You don't need an account or anything to watch that. It's totally free. So we'll put a link to that in the description in case you want to hear some really nice, heartfelt stories from fellow F1 fans about what made Eddie Jordan and his team so special to so many. We certainly won't forget Eddie anytime soon here at Bring Back V10s. He will always remain one of the big characters in our trips down memory lane. So let's finish by saying, Eddie Jordan, thank you for the memories. Thank you for building an underdog team that scaled incredible heights in Formula One. And thank you for remaining such a passionate player in the world of F1 right up until the end. Eddie Jordan, we salute you.